Right, I'm just going to reshoot the water series actually. So I had actually put together one that was called the water series. Obviously, there's a Call to Faith series, Demonic Realm series, there's a Bridge series, there's probably another one, but there was one that was called water series, but it's one video. And what I did with that video was I packed in four dreams and an explanation and videos, and it felt a bit much, maybe a little bit difficult to kind of partition all the different dreams, and so I thought I'd reshoot this one. Okay, so I'm reshooting this one as three separate videos. Do two dreams, another two dreams, and then a conclusion. Okay, which would then involve like the videos and stuff. But I wanted to redo the video as well anyway, that I had used on this one, and include a picture as well, which I didn't on the last one. So hopefully this will look or come across a lot better, and it will come across as a series rather than, as I said, me calling it a water series and it's just one video. Seems a bit weird. Okay, so anyway, I'll start with this one. So this one, the first dream then, was back in sometime in October 2024. So I didn't write the exact date. I wrote something around the 31st of October 2024 saying I had a dream a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember the date, but this is what it was about. Okay, so I'd written stuff down, but I hadn't written an actual date as to when it was. But this was just a single dream in a night, this one. Okay, so this one, how this started was I was walking along a kind of high street sort of area, typical sort of high street, I would have said, in the UK. But this one, okay, maybe a little bit different. So you had like what we would call the high street as well is also known as Main Street in the USA, but in the USA, so it's basically kind of like a main street really, that then you've got maybe other sort of roads that come off that also have, you know, commercial, you know, like shops and stuff like that, but you might have a main street that you've got like maybe like the big name shops, I would have said, and then off the side of those you'd have maybe smaller little boutiques and, you know, little bakeries or just small businesses. So I was in that kind of area. So I'm walking along more the main part, but then just off directly to my right are all the main the kind of parallel small streets that more little small businesses are off of, and I happen to be looking down one of those particular little streets, I suppose, at the time, and then suddenly water just rose from beneath, just no warning, no reason, just water just suddenly just came up through, I'm assuming, manhole covers or something like that, but it just came up and the water level rose almost instantly to a quite a high height, to the point where it was, you know, lifting cars up, and they were sort of floating about. Obviously, in this one actually there wasn't really many people around at all. So there's another dream I have that's sort of similar, and that one I notice there's quite a lot of people. This one I don't really notice that many people about. But yeah, just rose from beneath. The water was very, I would have said, like a turbulent, you know, river. You know, just after there's been really heavy rainfall and it churns up the riverbed, and rather than a sort of, not clear anyway, but clearer, rather than a clearer sort of water, it's very churned up with sediment. Okay, so that's what it looked like. And so I'm kind of thinking, is it sewage? But there was no reason to think it was sewage, actually. It just looked like churned up water that just rose up in that. Okay, so as I said, yeah, I thought maybe the drains are blown or something like that. But as I said, there was no kind of smell. Not that I remember smells really in dreams anyway. Um, as I said, no sewage, nothing like that. We were just bobbing up and down. But with this, it was like it was waves, which again, that doesn't make sense, does it really? If it's just water that's come up from below, you would expect it to be pretty calm and not moving, but it wasn't. This was actually quite choppy waves, and we were sort of bobbing up and down as the waves were kind of not sort of crashing in or anything, but just like you were sort of really, you know, a little way out at sea, and you've just got that kind of bobbing up and down of water, being on water. So that's what it felt like. Okay, so that's the first dream. Then the next dream was a triple dream. So I had three water dreams all in one night, back to back. Okay, so that one I just described was the first of its kind. I've never had one like that before. But then I have lots more. Okay, but they're all different. But I'll just do the first one here in this video, and then I'm going to go on to, as I said, another video for the second two. So this is part one, really, of the triple dream that I had, which was on the 18th of December 2024. So let's say roughly 2 months later of when it was. So this one was set very, very differently. Okay, so again, if you imagine how it starts in the dream, and my environment is a very much a, I would, yeah, like a, how's best to describe this? Well, it was an office environment. I would have said it was an office environment. Now, the reason I would say that is I was in a tower block. I should clarify. I was definitely in a tower block, quite high up, but I wasn't sure how many stories we were talking about. 10, 15, 20. I wasn't quite sure on how high, but I knew that we were quite high up in this tower block. And if you imagine in front of you, so where I was, I was kind of like almost like at the pretty close to the back wall of this office kind of environment. As I said, the reason I call it office is because in front of me, really quite a long distance in front of me, I could see all the way down to the other wall of the width really of the whole of the block. To the right of me, I would have said distance wise about 60 feet, let's say, roughly 60 feet or so. Then there was a little bit of a wall, only just a little bit, as a partition sort of wall, but solid like concrete wall. And then there was also some steps I could see from where I was. I could look across and I could see just the last, let's say, 3 steps coming up to ground level. I could kind of see from across to the side of me. And as I said, in front of me, I've got quite a few people sort of dotted around, and they're all set up in their own sort of, I don't know, they're sleeping rough, basically. If you think of it like that, it's sleeping rough. They're lying with their heads on like their rucksacks. They've maybe got sleeping bags. They've got things like maybe carrier bags and clothes, and all their belongings were kind of just put beside them, and they would just sleep in there. Okay, there wasn't any proper setup. I think there was people that had maybe camping fire things for cooking food and stuff, and I seem to remember somebody who had a washing line or something like that they'd put together somehow. But we were all, if you imagine us, as I said, we're all just looking after ourselves. We were just sleeping rough, and it felt like we'd been displaced in some way. So there's been some kind of disaster, and it's like, well, this office block is abandoned. Let's use that. So what I would say about the office block as well, and again, I keep saying office block because it was so open. I mean, it couldn't be a residential flats, and all of these walls have been smashed out. It was, no, this is an open plan office, and people have just decided to reside in it in the short term as a temporary thing, following some kind of disaster, is what it felt like to me anyway. Okay, so it's bare concrete, no carpet, no tiled floors, not decorated, just stripped back to concrete, very, very basic looking. I seem to remember that maybe even the windows were blown out or something like that. They may or may not have been. I just had this feeling if there was kind of open windows as well. Yeah, it was just rough. It was really, really rough. Now, the area that was in, I was very much aware based on how people look. So everybody around there all looked the same, and so it helped me to locate whereabouts this was. So what I wrote down was, I think it's maybe sort of Southeast Asia sort of area, maybe Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, maybe Thailand. It just by what the people look like. Simple as that. That's my reference point. Obviously, if you've got everybody who looks the same, by race, let's say, then it gives you an idea of location, doesn't it? So it was around there. I thought it was probably there. The feedback, I would have said, the feeling when I came out of the dream was Vietnam specifically. But I also later, when I was thinking about high tower blocks, I was kind of almost thinking like Thailand, like a Bangkok sort of thing, was what I was thinking at the time. But again, that was an afterthought, whereas my initial impression was Vietnam. Okay, and I've just looked up Vietnam on a map just because I was curious. I was like, how close are they together, Vietnam and Thailand? Obviously, they're pretty much neighbours, but Vietnam has a massive, well, their whole country is pretty much a coastline. So I thought, okay, right, well, that makes a bit more sense then for what's about to take place. So maybe it is Vietnam, and that's where I was thinking. So, as I said, I described most of the environment. Yeah. So, as I said, it feels like a disaster of some sort's happened. We're taking temporary refuge in this tower block. We're nice and we're high. We're feeling safe. I guess is what I'm thinking. Okay, so I was, as I said, I was just, if you imagine, all of that has just gone wrong and just been sort of like put into my mind, and I was like, bum bum bum, right? I can see. Okay, you kind of acclimatize yourself to your environment very quickly, and I was actually lying down in this environment, just lying down, looking forward, and I actually had like a backpack sort of thing behind my head that I was using as a pillow, and I had some, as I said, I had some stuff around me, just general things, but everyone was clearly travelling very light. Um, okay, and it's during the day as well. I was very aware it was during the day, um, but it was quite dark. So I think, as I said, these walls were blown out, but I think people had maybe put something up like curtains to sort of cover it from the daytime. But I know it wasn't nighttime. Okay. Anyway, so suddenly I just feel I'm getting wet. I can suddenly feel like the back of me is getting soaking wet from nowhere. I don't understand where it's coming from. And then, as I said, I can kind of glimpse across, and I mentioned I could see those last few steps. I start seeing water that's creeping up those steps as well, and then it's coming onto our floor. Okay, but we were basically the top floor that it went to, and then it would recede from there. Okay, so we were on like the best floor. Well, I mean, I suppose you could get higher and not get wet at all, unless this was the top floor. I don't know, but I didn't really know whether we were on the top floor or not. Um, I suppose it would make sense, wouldn't it? Unless there was people who were maybe holding that floor above and that floor above, and this was just the one we got, and it's you've got this floor. Look, be happy that you've got somewhere to stay. It could be that kind of thing. Anyway, so the back of me is getting really, really soaked, like up to, let's say, across, up to, not, I didn't go fully submerged or anything. I got soaking wet quite quick, up to, say, like half my face, something like that. And so I quickly bolt up, obviously, sit up. And then, and it doesn't go all that much higher. So it probably goes, I would have said, about 1 to 2 feet, maybe. That's about it. It wasn't really deep or anything like that. As I said, we were in quite a good spot, really, when it comes down to it. So I sort of speak across to somebody who is just sort of diagonally and not really that far away from me. And I was just baffled, obviously, the fact that I just got suddenly soaked. Again, I didn't enter the dream expecting that, if that makes sense. I just acclimatised myself, knew what was going on. Okay, right, then I get soaked pretty quickly into the dream. Yeah, there we go. As I said, the impressions I wrote down here was, I imagine I was kind of 10 stories plus. That's kind of where I think I was. Yeah, the back of me was completely soaked, but I jumped up fast, obviously reacting to this water, and so I didn't get much more wet than that. But obviously everything that was around me, that was all dotted about, beside me, both sides of me, that kind of stuff, that obviously got wet. I can't remember what those items were, but I'm pretty sure that some of those were was clothing and stuff like that. So I was basically, as soon as I got soaking wet, I thought, right, instinctively, right, well, I've obviously got to change out of this. I'm so soaking wet. I need to get out of it, get into some new clothes. And as I sort of mentioned that to someone, they were just sort of like, oh, there's no point. There's no point. And I think what they were doing is they were putting, as I said, I'm sure there's a person with a washing line. Like, I think maybe there might have been some people that took their clothes off, but most of them were just keeping their clothes on, and it was because, and they said, well, like, there's no point changing clothes because you're going to be drying it like pretty soon, just by the heat of the day. So because it was a hot country, hot environment, there was just no point really in taking the clothes off and putting dry ones on, because probably you're going to be sweaty anyway because of the heat, but also the heat of the day is just going to dry off your clothes anyway. So that was basically what I was told by somebody. Obviously, again, it was definitely in a foreign country for sure, but obviously they could communicate it to me as to what was going on. I did notice as well that in this, as I said, water only rose up about 1 foot, that kind of thing, is that people were kind of cupping and drinking the water. Now, again, the same as that first dream, The water again was really turbulent, kind of like a browny, sort of lightish browny kind of colour, churned up water. Um, yeah, a little, I suppose a little bit like you see after like a hurricane or something like that, where it's just stripped, a lot of the soil away and all of that kind of stuff. It was, as I said, very muddy, river-like water is what it looked like, and people were sort of kneeling down and cupping the water and drinking some, and I was kind of looking at it thinking, wow, you're drinking that, it doesn't look particularly nice to me, but I think again I'm not 100%. I think I did the same. So I cupped and I started drinking the water as well, because I guess maybe it's because we didn't have a good source of water. I don't know, but it seemed good enough for quite a few people around me that I thought, okay, I guess I'll do that as well and just drink some of this water. So just some quick thoughts, really across those two dreams. Well, the first dream, I kind of I basically already did that, didn't I? So if I cover the thoughts on this one, then yeah, I very much, as I said, the impression I got from the person I spoke to, again, I didn't go through everything that we spoke about, but the kind of impressions I got from people, the way that they were so kind of, oh yeah, just just stay wearing it. It's no point, it's going to get wet again. Was it felt like this water coming in was tidal, so it felt like this water came in at a certain time of day. They weren't shocked by it at all when it happened. It's like, oh, it's high tide, that kind of thing. We know when that is. Whereas for me, I had no idea about it at all. So it did shock me, but it didn't shock anybody else. And so, yeah, for me, it felt like it was like almost like the tide comes in at this day. And so if you happen to be here at this time, well, yeah, I mean, you're going to get soaked. That's just the way it is. Yeah, so again, it felt like this was normal. These were the living conditions that people were used to, and they'd been in these conditions for a while. Obviously, it was temporary. It looked like it was temporary, but these were people's homes now. This is where they were living. It was a real mixture of men, women. I can't remember children specifically, but yeah, men, women, just going about their day. They didn't really look like they were doing anything. It was just like people who have got really nothing to do. They're just waiting things out. Do you know what I mean? They weren't really doing anything. They were just lying around, sitting around, maybe entertaining themselves, talking, but that was it. No one was like off, maybe doing a job or anything like that. It was just a complete breakdown of society. It's basically what it was. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. When I spoke to that person initially, I was like, what's going, oh, we're getting soaked here, and I was kind of complaining, obviously, about the fact that I was getting wet. The person was like, well, like, think of the people who are on the floors below us. So there was obviously people that were in lower floors. So, I mean, I don't know if it was rushing up the stairs somehow, and it just got to that point, and it just stopped, and then it would slowly recede back down. But I didn't get the impression that maybe the people below us in the lower floors were completely flooded, to the ceiling. I got the impression that maybe it was rushing in, and then it was rushing up to the upper floors and washing those floors, and then maybe it was receding quite quick. I don't know, but surely people weren't staying in the lower floors and getting completely soaked and literally holding their breath or something. But at the same time, as I said, if the windows, that makes sense, doesn't it? I've only just thought about that. If the windows were blown out, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because then the water, as it goes up, maybe can just quite quickly pour out the windows as well, and that's why there weren't any windows. Again, that's just an impression I had. I didn't mention that in the previous one. I didn't write it down either, but I did get the impression, and it was not pitch black or anything like that in there, but there was no real major sunlight coming into the into this apartment block or this office building. As I said, it was quite dark, as I said, by these kind of these curtains that were covering these what felt like open windows. So yeah, that's my kind of initial thoughts on that one. I'll go into the next one, which is going to be Double Dream. This one will have I'm going to try and get a picture in on this one just to explain something real quick. I mean, you probably don't need the picture, to be honest, but I'll put it in there anyway. Okay, so this is part 1 of the water series, and I'll go into part 2 next. Okay, see you in the next one.